Thank you. Good morning. I'd like to welcome everyone to this meeting of the Joint Waste Disposal Board. Please note that the meeting is being broadcast and recorded. The board is together at Bracknell Forest Council with some officers joining online. The first item on the agenda is apologies, and I note that everybody is present, so I haven't received any. This being the annual meeting of the board, the next items of business are to elect the chair and the vice chair for the coming year. May I please have nominations for the chair?
I'm happy to propose Councillor Dorothy Hayes.
I'm happy to second her.
Are there any further nominations? There being none, Councillor Mrs Hayes, I hand over to you.
Thank you. May I please have nominations for Vice Chair, and if I can, I would like to propose it myself, and that being my fellow member here on my side, Mr. Councillor Page. Would I have a seconder, please? Thank you. Happy to second. Now we come to agenda item 4. The full and there's the point of the chairman. Then the full text for declaration of interest is set out on the agenda at item 4. If any member has a disclosure of pecuniary interest or any affected interest to declare, please indicate, and I will come to you in turn.
Nope.
No, we're all. Thank you. Thank you. There are no declarations, but may I remind everyone that you can make a declaration at any time, should it occur to you at a later point. Anyone declaring disclosure pecuniary interest will need to leave the room when we get to that relevant item. Okay. And then we come to our agenda item 5. The next item is for consideration is urgent items. Are there any?
No, Chairman, I'm not aware of any.
Okay. Right, then we go to the minutes of the meeting of the Joint Waste Board. Our correct record of the minutes of the meeting, which was the 7th of July. Please
Agreed.
indicate if you have any issues with the accuracy. No? Anyone? And no doubt we'll be doing the item with regards to the booking system. Nobody has indicated, and there is an issue, therefore I take those as agreed. Right, and then we move on to the important parts, and that being agenda item 7, progress report on pages 11 to 56. Oliver Bird, please, would you present your report, sir?
Chairman, thank you very much. At the end of the last meeting, we agreed to, as officers, to come back to this meeting with an update to the presentation on the booking system that Sarah gave, and indeed she's ready to give that presentation now. But I know that there's been correspondence this week around the booking system and the way that a decision might be taken. And I suppose I wanted to, with your agreement, kind of throw it open to the board to discuss what they want from us today and how they want this section to go, given the changes that have been discussed this week.
Ladies and gentlemen, can I take that as we discussed at that time? Yes.
Well, Chair, we didn't want to in any way not have the presentation, but could I just give a bit more background to the email that I sent round early this week? As colleagues will know, we had not only our usual elections in Reading, but an all-out set of elections because of new ward boundaries. And as always with those sorts of elections, it triggered the arrival of a large number of new members, and about a third of the council have never been on the authority before, and questions arose particularly from new members about the booking system. There's already been a very helpful initial presentation from Oliver and colleagues to some of our new members, which gave rise to further comments and questions, and it would certainly help us in Reading if we could look to take a decision in the early new year to allow us to do a bit more work engaging with the newer members, what I might describe without being too patronising as missionary work, and to address some concerns. Some are more legitimate, others are founded less on less knowledge of the system, but issues of access to the site, particularly for those with lack of mobility or linguistic problems, access to the internet and such like. Questions that we have discussed before as a board, and issues that still remain a bit of a challenge. So I would like to ask the board if we could defer the decision for perhaps a quarter to enable us in Reading to do that work. It might also be helpful just to get a formal indication from the other authorities, hopefully Reading as well, that we want to continue with the booking system, either unamended or with any changes. Other colleagues may feel more comfortable because of the of work you've already done with your colleagues, that you can say, well, it's all hunky-dory, please proceed. But I think it might also enable other colleagues to undertake any consultations if they so wish. But that would be my proposition, that we defer this to allow consultations within our own authorities, and obviously it's not for the board to prescribe what format that should take. In the case of Reading, we would actually want to do some more presentations to colleagues and enable Oliver and colleagues from RE3 to come back with some of the points that they will be aware were raised at the recent meeting, which only involved some, as it was convened at fairly short notice, and my colleague here, Councillor Rowland, may want to add any points, but that would be my formal proposition.
At this
to the
point in
board.
time, I did take it on after we spoke, and I did speak to other members. It's not so much deferring it to that meeting of, I think, is a bit far, March, and therefore I have requested officers, and I'm actually arranging it for my own officers to undertake a classroom meeting of members, not only to teach all members, because you'd be surprised how many don't know also our contract. And we have a contract that's coming up in 2031. That's not very far off. It was 30 years, and it is in a very complex contract. And therefore, I've requested my own officers to take it into perspective that we not only show them the booking system, some of them haven't even, I'm sure some of you here, and I will arrange for that, the London Road tip that you all contribute to as well with over the years. Not only that, then will come into play the contract. Yep. I would hope the officers would take on that this would be undertaken before December. We could move the December to a little later, but I wouldn't want to go all the way to March.
Yeah, no, I agree.
Yes,
Yeah.
and December, if we could arrange it, that's where I would like to see the new year finished off, and we start all afresh in the new year. But I do feel it would be appropriate that we could do it, but I don't want to go further than the December. Okay.
Yeah, we could live with that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Is that okay with Clive? And you? Yeah.
That's fine.
Yes.
Chair, could I just, you made a point which I should have done in respect of the wider contract, of the contract and the wider context. I think would be very helpful to have that as a presentation that's obviously available to all authorities. I mean, when Oliver did his presentation to the Reading meeting, I think there was a brief introduction, but it was primarily focused on the booking system because that's what he was asked to present on. But I think the wider context, the history of the partnership, is essential as well. Yep. Sorry, Karen, you wanted to come.
Yes, Karen. Councillor.
I was just going to say, I was just going to say, it really is, I think, about education, as you were saying, Dorothy, really for all members to be able to have the opportunity to review what the processes are and how it can play into an advantage. And certainly I think to have some understanding for the wide range of communities that we do serve, and how there could be work done to ensure that all communities are able to take part in, fully in the system and everything. So I do think it's more about education, and I do think that there's time that needs to be accorded to that. So I'm all for it. Thank you.
It will, if I may. Oh,
I just wanted to suggest something. In order to assist in that education, I wonder if officers have made any calculation of the climate impact, the CO2 impact of reintroducing a free-for-all at our waste recycling centres with the associated traffic jams that ensues, because having hundreds of cars sitting there idling while waiting to get in at various times must cause an awful lot of CO2 emissions, and we need to take that into account as well when we make any decisions about continuing the booking system or not.
very good point. Very good point. Go ahead.
Chairman, thank you. And just to answer that question, no, we haven't done any calculations. I suppose what occurs to me, obviously before we had the booking system, there were queues, and we can say with some confidence there was a lot of idling going on, a lot of engines just revving away and doing nothing. But we didn't measure it at that time because we didn't really feel there was any reason to. However, it occurs to me that perhaps some form of measurement should be taken by the councils now, whilst we don't have the booking system, so that we could actually do that calculation if we ever got rid of the booking system. It seems to me that's the only way really of making that comparison, and this is the opportunity to get the first part of that calculation done before and if we returned to not having the booking systems. So that's a really, really good idea. Chairman, I was just going to suggest one more thing. I think it's a really good opportunity. I mean, this is a meeting with decisions to take, and it's not really a meeting at which we should be doing things just kind of for the sake of it. But I don't think this is. I wonder whether it would be helpful to the board for Sarah to go through the slides that have been amended since the last meeting, and I think to take some feedback from members to make sure we inform the presentations that are to come.
Yes.
If everyone's happy with that, then I would invite Sarah to.
Oh, very much so.
No, I know that.
No,
Sorry.
it
Sorry.
Working up for it.
No, I think that's sensible, because then that we can say that we know what's in front of us. We are prepared, and the officers will go forward with what we're requiring them to do, and we can come back here in December and have our points put over correctly. Fair enough? Yes, let's go ahead.
Right, Sarah, over to you.
Right, can you see that?
Yes.
Yes, we can.
Okay. So do you want me to go through the whole presentation or just the new bits?
I think if you flick through the whole presentation, just for anyone who hasn't seen it, but the stress, as you were planning anyway, should be on those new bits of information really that you've added since the last meeting. Thanks.
Okay. Yeah, so it's the same presentation that you saw previously. So you'll remember that it's got 3 sections to it. So we'll start with the access statistics again. I won't expand on these bits because I think we're familiar with those. Yeah, so you'll recall that at the last meeting we looked at how the number of slots has increased over time as we've responded to changing conditions. We saw that the number of slots we've got available now are less than the number of visitors that we previously had prior to the introduction of a booking system, but that we are not currently fully booked despite that. So these are figures from July, and we can see that then there was about 1/5 of all slots that hadn't been booked. And that is, I haven't done the calculations for each month, but that is fairly representative. There is a lot of availability in the system. You will recall that we looked at this slide, which broke down the week by a 30-minute periods, and we can see which slots have a high level of bookings and which ones have more availability. And you will recall that we talked about the way the bookings are profiled during the week to reflect when the transfer stations are busier, because obviously we want to maintain access for council vehicles who are also delivering services for our residents. Obviously, because the sites are not fully booked, residents don't need to book a long way in advance. So we saw that a lot of people are making same day bookings or booking no more than 1 day in advance. But this is a new slide. So you asked at the last meeting for some information on the number of people who come to site without a booking and what happens to those people. So this is data that was collected in the first week of August, and we can see that the vast majority of visitors came to site with a booking. Of those who didn't come to site with a booking, some were invited to park up and make a booking whilst they were on site. So those people will have had a smartphone or similar in order to be able to do that. Some people will have been allowed in without a booking, so they might have been people without the ability to make a booking whilst on site, but they will have been reminded of our access arrangements so that they know to book for next time. And there were a small number of people who were turned away because they didn't have a booking, and that was most likely in times when we were busy on site anyway and had a high number of people who had booked. So this graph again was an original one. So you'll remember that we said that the visitor numbers had fallen more steeply than the tonnages of the site in the period in which we'd had a booking system in place. And that means that residents are bringing in more waste per visit. What we didn't look at last time, though, was how this drop in tonnage at the recycling centre compares to tonnage that we see overall in the RE3 partnership. So this is a new slide. You won't find this one in the packs that you've got, unfortunately. It's a more recent addition, but it just shows us that the total household waste arisings over the RE3 partnership have remained relatively stable over the last few years, at least until the last few months. But obviously we are seeing more houses built in the RE3 area and population is going up. So therefore, residents are becoming less wasteful overall. It doesn't change the fact that visits to the recycling centre are becoming more efficient, but it's just something to bear in mind. So now we're going to move on to some of the benefits of a booking system. So again, this is new information. You asked us at the last meeting to just make it a bit clearer in these slides what the impact of queues is. So this is obviously for Smallmead. We've highlighted the entrance to the site in green, and then the access road is obviously there in yellow, and highlighted some of the surrounding businesses and things. So obviously we've got the landfill site on the left-hand side of the screen, which potentially will be developed in future. We've got a few houses, and then obviously there's the local businesses as well. So when there is a queue for Island Road, on Island Road to get to the recycling centre, obviously that can impact on all these other things because there is just that single access road. And then the same is true of Longshot Lane. So less variety perhaps in terms of the things around the RE3 site. But yes, lots and lots of businesses who again can be affected by queuing down that single road. So yeah, as we saw last time, residents have told us that they find that there is less queuing now that we've got a booking system in place. And obviously because we've got the booking system, we've been able to introduce the pedestrian access. And as you've already mentioned, there should be less idling of cars as well. You will also remember that residents told us they found it slightly easier to recycle with a booking system in place. And we saw that the recycling rate at the recycling centres started to go up until such point as obviously they were affected by changes made at the curbside. Again, this is a new slide. So you asked us for some information about population growth. So what I've done here is take some historical data, both from when we didn't have a booking system in place and the recent data when we have had a booking system in place. And I have applied that data to the ONS population forecast from 24. Applied that data to 2042, which is in 20 years' time. And basically what you can see here is that the tonnages that we might expect to receive at the recycling centre and the visitor numbers at the recycling centre could be lower in 20 years' time than they actually were in 2017 to 2019 if we keep a booking system in place. So obviously waste generation varies depending on a whole range of factors. So this isn't a forecast and it will change, but it just gives us some indication of the impact of a booking system. And obviously, as we said at the last meeting, if residents continue to make their visits efficient, it might reduce the need for us to make big structural changes at the recycling centres, which obviously could be quite costly. So we looked at other booking system benefits at the last meeting. The one to mention on here is probably the postcode validation, which I forgot to add in at the last meeting. So obviously with the booking system, our residents enter their postcode online and the booking system is able to validate that it is a postcode in the RE3 area. So essentially when the resident comes to site, all staff need to do is check that the postcode on a resident's proof of address matches what was given at the time of booking. Obviously, before the booking system was introduced, we were much more reliant on staff knowledge of which postcodes are in our area, or they needed to do a quick manual check. So now we're going to move on to some of the concerns around the booking system. So you'll recall we looked last time at the potential risk of increased residual waste as a result of people being discouraged from using the recycling centre. And we saw that residual waste had increased slightly in the first year in which we had a booking system in place. But when we looked a bit closer at that data, it shows that actually it was probably more the result of the sort of start of the pandemic that caused that, as opposed to the booking system itself. You will recall this slide on fly tipping. So this was the total fly tip incidents reported by each council on the sort of national database. And we could see that fly tips for Reading appeared to be coming down a bit. Bracknell relatively stable over the last few years. And Wokingham, there appeared to have been a big spike in fly tips. Although I've since been able to talk to the enforcement officers at Wokingham, and I understand that in recent years a new reporting system has been introduced. And that is believed to be the reason for that increase. One of the things you asked for at the last meeting was for us to look at the types of waste that's being fly tipped. So that is represented on this slide. And we can see that potentially up to 84% of waste could have come to the recycling centres. However, obviously the recycling centres are only for waste that's come from RE3 households and is delivered by the householders. We know that businesses often generate very similar waste to householders, and businesses obviously are not entitled to use the recycling centres for free. It's also worth noting that if any of that waste on the left-hand side was household waste, potentially a lot of that could have also have been collected via the curbside systems. So this graph is also a new one. This is for Reading Borough Council. But what I've done here is to break down the number of bookings for the recycling centre by Reading Borough Council ward, and these are presented in ascending order. And then alongside that, what I've done is map the number of fly tips per ward that were reported in the same time period. And what this appears to show is that there are more fly tips in areas where we have fewer bookings for the recycling centre. So this might be something that we want to look a bit further into. Obviously, we've already seen that there hasn't been an overall increase in the number of fly tips in Reading, during the time we've had a booking system in place. But it could potentially be that the location of the fly tips could have been affected. So it might be we want to look and see whether there was a pattern in where fly tips were taken has changed since we've had a booking system in place. But this is the equivalent data for Bracknell, and you will see that this almost shows exactly the opposite. So here we can see that there appears to be more fly tipping in places where there are more visits to the recycling centre. So this might suggest that there are other factors involved in where people choose to fly tip as well. Or of course, it might be a case of how good residents are in particular areas are actually choosing to report fly tips. It's also worth noting, of course, that I've spoken to the enforcement teams at each of the 3 councils, and none of them has drawn a link between fly tipping and the booking system. But yes, might be something we want to look at a bit further. I should note here that there isn't any data for Wokingham, so I've not received the fly tipping statistics for them, but happy to do the same analysis if that is provided. So we talked last time about the causes of uncertainty when analysing fly tipping data. You'll remember, obviously, we talked about the fact that there's different interpretations of what a fly tip is across the different councils. Not all fly tips are necessarily reported, and we are often reliant on the member of the public and their description of exactly what that fly tip is. So we're going to move on now to digital exclusion. So what I've tried to do here is set out the factors that might be relevant to why someone can't make a booking online on the left. And then on the right, the methods by which the RE3 partnership tries to sort of counteract that. So all 3 of the RE3 councils take bookings via the phone for people who can't make a booking online. Also, residents are able to book not just at home, but really bar anywhere that's got an appropriate device, internet connection and support where that is necessary. So it might be places like at work or at council libraries or internet cafes and things. And it is also possible for friends and family to book on behalf of a resident. So although it's only RE3 residents who can visit the RE3 sites, there is no restriction on who can make a booking on behalf of an RE3 resident. That can be done by anyone from anywhere. It's also worth noting that we don't require residents to bring any printouts or display anything on a smartphone when they come to site. They only need their name or their booking reference number. And the methods that we see on this slide are largely consistent with those offered by other council services. For example, if you want to report a fly tip or book a bulky waste collection. So this slide follows on from that. So here we're looking at the index of multiple deprivation. So we've got more deprived areas on the left-hand side of the screen and the more affluent areas on the right-hand side of the screen. And we're looking at the number of visits that were made to the recycling centres between April and June of this year. So we can see that no area within the RE3 partnership has sort of been completely excluded from the sites. All areas are making bookings. You do get more bookings from the more wealthy areas, but in some ways that may have been expected because they potentially got a higher disposable income and able to keep up with the latest trends, etc. You'll remember this slide from last time. So this was just looking at the additional burden for residents and the fact that obviously people do need to go online and make a booking. They do need to provide some personal data. They do need to come to site at roughly the right time with the use of the booking system. And obviously for some residents, that is a process that they don't particularly like. So yeah, this is some more new data to the presentation. So obviously we make reference a number of times during the presentation to our user satisfaction survey from last year. So what we've done here is just break that data down by the individual council. So this data is for Longshot Lane, so we've got the data for Bracknell and for Wokingham. And you will see that they're largely quite similar responses for the two councils. The main difference here is about how easy it is to recycle at the site. So both respondents from both councils saying that it's a lot easier with the booking system in place, but Wokingham slightly more so than Bracknell. And then this is the equivalent data for Smallmead. So here we're looking at obviously data for Reading and Wokingham. Again, tends to be quite similar responses for the two councils. Bigger differences here in regards to the amount of queuing time. So Wokingham finding the queues a bit better than Reading. And then right at the bottom, the question about being able to access the site whenever people liked. Just slightly more people in favour of perhaps coming without a booking in Reading than there were in Wokingham. So we ended the last meeting with this slide, just reflecting on the fact that there are mixed views about the booking system, but with a slight preference for pre-booking. I think you've already talked about next steps, so I won't cover that one. But this is just our last slide. So again, it's not one in your pack. It's one that we've been requested to add since, but it probably is worth going through. So obviously there is an option to sort of do a hybrid system where we have bookings at some times and free access for people at other times. And ideally, I suppose that would provide the best of both worlds to people. But unfortunately, in this case, I'm not sure that it would do. And I have set out some of the reasons for that on this slide, and I'll just run through them quickly. So first of all, there are differing views on when a booking system has most benefit. So obviously, the transfer stations and neighbouring businesses tend to be more operational during weekdays. So you could argue that the booking system has most benefit then. But also the recycling centres tend to be busier at weekends. So the benefits in terms of resident queue times and car idling and better access to bays and things, that's probably, you see those benefits more at the weekend. So yeah, different views about when a booking system has most benefit. Challenging communication would be something else we'd have to think about. Obviously, if you've got periods when residents need to book and periods when they don't need to book, there's much more reliance on the resident to remember when they need a booking and when they don't. And I suspect the level of compliance during periods in which we needed a booking would likely go down. Also, potential for more confrontation on site, particularly if we had periods during the day when bookings were needed and periods when they weren't needed in the same day. It would be likely you'd get people with bookings and without bookings arriving at the same time, and without the ability to prioritise who comes in first, that could potentially be a bit messy. Worth noting that the commercial vehicle permits are something that we've had in place since 2016. They're currently incorporated within the booking system process so that people with vans only need to enter their personal data once. If we went for a hybrid option, that would need to be separated out again, and people with vans would potentially need to enter their data twice if they needed to book as well as have a permit. In terms of partial data, obviously, we get data from all our users at the moment. So, for example, the postcodes which we use to identify which local authority visitors are coming from, and that feeds through into sort of cost and tonnage allocations. If we only had partial data for where people are coming from, it may not be appropriate to use that data in the same way, and we may need to use some more estimates again. And then the very last point, just about the potential loss of some of the booking system benefits. So we've talked, for example, about more efficient journeys. We see that because of the booking system. If we had periods when people could just access the recycling centres as and when they wanted, it may be that the benefits we see currently would just be eradicated by people coming as and when they wanted during those free periods. And we talked about the pedestrian access. Potentially that would be something we'd have to remove because we wouldn't necessarily want to allow people to park up during periods in which there was a queue on site in order to try and jump that queue and unload their waste on the road. So yes, as it says at the bottom, that's not recommended. Yeah, and it's probably also worth noting that obviously if different councils wanted different access arrangements at the site, potentially we would see the same sort of challenges in terms of the operations at the site. And that is it.
Excellent. Ladies and gentlemen, can I open up to the floor any questions on it or recommendations or... Apart from, please, can we have the last slide as well sent to us? So, yes, Councillor Harrison.
I was just wondering, apropos that presentation, when we're looking at fly tips, have we communicated with the Public Protection Partnership that looks into fly tipping in Bracknell Forest and West Berkshire? Because from what I recall as to the source of fly tipping, it makes a lot of sense that it is not related at all to the booking system, because a lot of the fly tipping that happens, certainly in Bracknell Forest, is done by people who don't even live in Bracknell Forest. So the booking system at the Waste Recycling Centre is irrelevant to it. It's people coming through and tipping. And again, the correlation between people, between wards where people are fly tipping and the places where people are making the most bookings are probably coincidental, because the places where the fly tipping is occurring is where people think that they are not going to be seen, and it tends to be country lanes where in remote areas of Warfield and Winkfield and parts of Sandhurst where the fly tipping actually occurs. And therefore it's got nothing to do with the behaviour of residents. It's just the fact that in those areas people are not going to be seen fly tipping.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I believe that Sarah's been in touch with our Envirocrime officer from the PPP, but you know, obviously I'd encourage that conversation to happen. I think one thing I would say is that the majority of fly tips that are discovered within the borough are actually commercial orientated rather than household waste. Yeah, I don't think there's a strong link, if a link, there at all.
There were actually also, icon for the benefit of those listening remotely, there were also a couple of fly tips of entire caravans or mobile homes. I don't think the way that our waste and recycling centres work is going to make any difference to people tipping caravans.
Thank you, Councillor Harrison. Thank you, Damien. Any other further questions? Yes, can I?
I noticed on the list of reasons for digital deprivation, if you like, there was no mention of it's not specifically digital, but no mention of people not actually having the ability to get to the recycling centres as to why they were online bookings.
Officers, any?
Yeah, I mean, I think that is a fundamental, an unavoidable characteristic of this service, which is that it's that element of the waste service which the resident takes to the council, if you like, or the facility, where all the other ones that we offer as a broader service are about the council going to the resident. There are reasons for that. It might be because they're larger items that are being dropped off of the HWRCs, or a wider range of items. I think that is a broader conversation, which of course we can have, around the way in which those sorts of elements of service that you see at the HWRC could be delivered to residents. And over time that has broadened out. We see battery collections, there are wee collections, there are banks around for a variety of different things, which again, I know people taking it, but they're in the neighbourhood. I suspect that probably quite a lot of the functionality of the HWRC can't be replicated at your doorstep if you don't have a car or a bike, and there may be aspects of that we have to accept, I suppose. But it's certainly a broader conversation that we could have.
And this is just an observation from having to cancel a booking recently myself. I went straight to the website and I couldn't find a way of cancelling it on the website. I then had to get my phone out and go to the email and cancel it from the email.
Very good observation, sir. Ms. Councillor.
Thank you, Chair. And I thank Sarah for the report, which she has also added to, actually, after we had the review with some members and some feedback in Reading. So I thank officers for the attempt to try to continue to address those points. I know colleagues will have noted the two graphs that were simply the maps that were showing the potential lineup and queuing of cars that could be affected were there to be no booking system. And I think that a point was made earlier, which I would encourage officers to do more work on, about really trying to see what we can do about those emissions from cars. It was a very, very good point and something that we really need to consider. You know, with the road to RE3 that we've got there in Reading, we are potentially, Councillor Page and I will be at a planning applications committee next week where we will be looking at possibly the inclusion of a Gypsy and Traveller site right there along that route. That route does not have a wide area for expansion of the road. There are a number of businesses there, and there may be businesses further on down the way that will be developing in coming years. So that's another factor to take thought of, but I really do want us to consider the long-term emissions over decades, potentially, of a lack of a booking system. The digital exclusion, again, I am extremely keen on, and that digital exclusion goes from especially the world that I see of an increasing number of people that do not speak English as a first language, and so there is simply digital exclusion because they don't speak the language, and that is something that, as you can tell from someone who barely speaks proper English here myself, there are immigrants in the world, and there are people that come into our towns, and they need to be welcomed, and they need to be able to understand fully how they can take part and get rid of the rubbish responsibly. So that is something that I would like to continue to see some work done on. I think those are my primary points. I will probably get back to officers with some detail, because I think the other final thing is as these slides are going out to members to look at, I think we really need to think about the readability of them for a member that's perhaps not as G'd up with different acronyms, with exactly what we're saying on each page, to actually look at each one of these slides to say, if I was looking at this for the first time, could I really read and understand what those pages are saying? But I think that's a minor bit of work that could certainly be communicated by email to officers. But overall, those are my primary points, I believe, this time.
Excellent. Any other further? Well, may I say, oh, yes.
Just to note that there was a couple of slides on fly tipping for Bracknell and Reading, making the link between the recycling centre booking system, and there wasn't any for Wokingham. However, we have recently set up an antisocial behaviour team, and part of their remit is to monitor and respond to fly tipping, so we do have that data and we can share that.
Thank you. Well, having said all that, I must say the inputs were excellent for us to be able to put a paper. And now we're looking at what we won't be taking the recommendations, as you can see on page 11, as set. But would officers be taking it that a meeting, they will first arrange for the papers that we've requested the inputs into. The papers will be get round to ourselves, so we can discuss with our officers a education between now and before the end of the year, because I would like to put, the contract that we put together, that we were going to, and we agreed, one way or the other, today's one. I don't want it to be carried on and on. I do think we need to settle it, and I would appreciate that this would be done before the end of the year, and that we all work together for a convenient date to educate our councillors, be they new and old, and then we come back before the end of the year or just in the beginning, but I would prefer the end of the year and have it put to bed. Is that in agreement with everyone? Yes.
Yeah, fine.
Yes. Thank you. No, not at all. I mean to say it's an important issue, and it's something we need to let everyone understand which way we go and why. Thank you.
Chairman, just very quickly, the next meeting's scheduled for the 8th of December.
Yes,
Do we
I
all
have-
think that that's sufficient time, or would an extra couple of weeks make a little
Yeah, I was going
difference?
to say,
or-
but not Christmas Eve. Oh, yes, sorry, yes, sorry. Yeah, yes, you do. I'm glad you're awake then I'm not. Thank you. Do you want to go ahead? Sorry.
Yes, Chairman, thank you very much. I'll actually hand over to Sarah, because Sarah's going to take you through the performance statistics, the bag splitting, and those other items on that report.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yes. So starting with the performance statistics for the three councils. So you'll have seen from the report that I presented the data for April through to August for this year and compared it with the same period from last year. And you will note that the recycling rate for all three councils has gone down. So the tonnages are down across the board, but we've seen a bigger drop in recycling tonnages than we have seen in residual tonnages, and that is the reason why you get the lower recycling rates overall. There are a number of factors affecting our tonnages. So obviously we're still recovering from a pandemic. So we know in particular that that's affecting our glass tonnages at the recycling banks. Obviously it was quite a long, hot, dry summer, so that's affected our garden waste tonnages that we've received. Cost of living is probably having lots of impact on consumer behaviours, so that will be a factor. And of course you'll have noticed that the food waste tonnages, particularly in Reading and Bracknell, have dropped off a lot. Obviously both of those were new services last year. And it may be that residents, by participating in these services, are becoming a bit more aware of how wasteful they are, and particularly with the economic situation, trying to reduce their food waste. So these are not factors that are exclusive to RE3, and we know that there are other councils who are experiencing the same thing. I don't know the extent to which our situation is replicated elsewhere. But that will be something for us to keep an eye on as we go through the year. Are there any questions on statistics?
Please continue.
Okie doke. So next section then is on bag splitting. So you may recall that in the past we have undertaken bag splitting at the two recycling centres. The purpose of that is to extract recyclables from the bagged residual waste that we receive at the recycling centres. So yeah, we had to pause that service, unfortunately, due to the COVID pandemic, but we now believe we're at a stage where we can start that up again. So the plan would be for the service to run in a very similar way to what it did last time. So residents bringing bagged waste to site would be encouraged to place their bags in a slightly separate area of the recycling centre. And then at some point later, a member of staff will go through these bags and extract the recycling. There are just a couple of small tweaks that we would propose this time round. So the first relates to sort of communication and education of residents. So obviously it's good if we can get the recycling out of the bagged waste, but ideally it wouldn't be there in the first place. So we are hoping to perhaps encourage some residents to stay and watch the bag splitting process and actually see their own waste sorted, and identify what could have been taken out for recycling whilst at the recycling centre. The contractor won't be able to offer that for all residents, and I suspect not all residents would want to stay and watch. But if we can engage a few people, that might be worth doing. In order to reach a wider audience, we hope to do some communication. So Monica and I haven't had a detailed conversation about how that would work yet, but it may be, for example, that we'll use some of the statistics from what we find in the waste and communicate that via posters on site, or potentially leaflets, or maybe even through the email confirmation that you get when you make a booking. The other slight tweak we're planning to make is in relation to the PPE, personal protective equipment required when staff undertake the bag splitting. So our contractor are engaged in some ongoing research about bioaerosols and the extent to which these are generated during a sorting process. So some additional PPE will be required by staff, and we will need to keep our process of bag splitting under review. I wouldn't expect us to need to stop the process once we've restarted it again. But yes, it may be that different PPE is required, or we may need to rethink sort of how or where we undertake the bag splitting. But yeah, we will keep that under review if members are happy with us going ahead in that manner.
I see no objections to that. Yes, sorry.
Sorry, Chair, I just had a couple of queries about this, because this is something, and forgive me, it's because I'm new to this board, something that's been done before, has been stopped, and now it would be reinitiated. What are the resourcing, the realities of the resourcing and budgeting implications for something like this? I would suggest it's probably more resourcing, but could officers clarify that just a bit more?
Hello, I looked at the figures actually when we used to do it, and it's about £100,000 a year to do that.
Is that when we say the 100,000 costings, then do we have anything against it that says, but having done such work, there is an income from it? Yes.
Sorry, I haven't looked at that yet. It was just as I was looking at the historical stuff because of the budget, so I wanted to understand the movements, because obviously I'm relatively new, so if you know what's gone on before, but yeah, we can look at that, but
Yes,
I haven't done so.
it's not just saying it's costing us that.
Yeah.
We would want to
Yeah.
see the benefits
Yeah.
as well. Thank you.
Chairman, yeah, there is. I mean, there definitely is an income. I think we'll need to split that out from the wider income, because we're removing items of bric-a-brac and so on and so forth, which are already sold, which are also donated by residents. So there's two streams, if you like, what comes out of the black bags and what is donated separately. I'm not sure of the precise extent to which we could separate those two from the income stream, but yes, it does contribute to an income stream, and of course, it's also reducing the cost of disposal by taking items that have a value out of what would otherwise just go straight to EFW or landfill.
Yes, so the importance is it would assist in that. Because, again, going back to education, I don't want to be putting up big posters with us standing over a sack, ripping it open and everything coming out. But again, it does assist that we re-enter into a new era again, and educating our residents. We are watching as well. But I'm sure the press and all the publicity side will be put together. Yes. Questions on that proportion? No. Can we continue? Thank you.
Yep, so I think next on the agenda was the persistent organic pollutants, or POPs. So the Environment Agency have identified that there's a large quantity of these pollutants in upholstered furniture, so things like sofas and dining room chairs. And this is going to have some implications for the RE3 partnership and for the waste industry as a whole. So there are two main impacts. So the first one is that persistent organic pollutants need to be destroyed through incineration. As members may be aware, we can't send bulky furniture direct to an EFW facility, so it needs to be shredded first. There aren't currently many shredding facilities available, and certainly not ones that could that are in sort of enclosed buildings that can keep all these POPs contained. So that would likely come at an additional cost. The second implication, I suppose, is more of an operational one. So items that contain POPs, if these items are damaged and they come into contact with other items that don't contain POPs, essentially the non-POPs containing items can be contaminated with POPs. So the Environment Agency require us to keep these items separate from any other items. So when collecting the items, for example, if upholstered furniture is part of a fly tip or bulky waste collection, these items will need to be kept separate on a vehicle. When they get delivered to the transfer station, there will also need to be a separate area for them there. And if we receive those sorts of items directly at the recycling centres, there will also need to be a separate area for them there as well. So yeah, big operational changes. So the Environment Agency has asked local authorities to come back by the end of the year and indicate how compliant they are with all this guidance. It's not expected that many authorities will be able to say they are compliant, and the waste industry is currently lobbying the government to extend the timescales so that more arrangements can be put in place. There are also currently some uncertainties around some of the information that has been provided by the Environment Agency. So yes, we are currently working with the contractor in relation to this. And the plan is to report back to you at a later meeting about how it is going. Any questions on?
Not so much some questions, it's a discussion I've had with officers, and just to enlighten members, would you like to?
Chairman, yeah, thanks. What we will, I think, put together is a letter from the chairman on behalf of the board, and send it to each of our respective MPs, just to explain really the situation. This is a situation that goes back to the Stockholm Convention in 2004, so it's not a new thing. The EA, if they were here now, would say, there's no delay. The only delay that's happened has been that we haven't enforced on something that we can enforce on, and we will enforce on from 2023 onwards. But the difficulty from a local government and waste management industry perspective is that there, as Sarah has already described, there is a dearth of places where this material can be safely, under an atmospherically controlled process, shredded and made ready for sending to EFW where it must be destroyed. There are also potentially significant changes in the way that the councils will have to collect this. That's something that we cannot deal with through this contract. That's going to be a burden on individual councils for the reasons that Sarah's described. So whilst we all recognise, and no one is suggesting for a moment that they want persistent organic pollutants in the environment or in our homes or in anything, there has to be some kind of a practical recognition that this will not happen by the 1st of January. And for that reason, we propose that we would write to our MPs to see whether or not they can bring to bear their influence on the EA and the way that the EA kind of ramps this up, if you like. We feel that we need a sort of a softer landing, recognising that we must get to a point where we're all compliant, but it will not be by the 1st of January, whatever we want or say. So that was the proposal.
Yes.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Oliver, for that kind of update. I mean, it really honestly sounds like a bit of a headache, and something that certainly your average person and even myself had not really thought of or taken on board in regards to what we've got going there. I would propose perhaps that if I would think proper progress would come from you all kind of if you're able to establish some kind of baseline to come back to us with about where we are at, if that's even feasible, just so we can know where we're at. And I assume that other councils and other RE3 facilities facilities would probably be looking at what their realities are too, and then we could do a little bit of a comparison so we can take this a little further down the road if indeed it's going to be something that's enforced. I think as long as we're showing reasonable progress, understand where we're at, understand where we might need to get to with any kind of numbers or anything to back us up, that might be a logical step, and certainly, of course, writing to MPs.
Thank you for that. It is important, I think, that the MPs realise the pressure we're under and what sort of thing that it is there, and it's for them to then do their part. So that was, and you don't mind then that when we come back, we'll have the letter things and everything. But if Oliver can put it together, and then I'll circulate amongst ourselves as well. Yeah, thanks.
Sarah, you're on.
Yep. So the next bit on the agenda then is mattresses. Obviously the RE3 partnership is always looking for ways to increase recycling rates. One item which is recycled at some other recycling centres but not currently via the RE3 HWRCs is mattresses. So the contractor has identified a potential route for these. So it would involve mattresses going to a facility in London where they would be dismantled by hand, and then the various elements would go off for recycling. Obviously, as you'll have seen in the report, the cost of recycling mattresses is more expensive than the cost of landfilling them. So I guess it is a case of weighing up the sort of benefits, the sort of slight increase in recycling rate, the potential environmental benefits against the sort of financial cost. If we were to go ahead, we would propose to undertake a trial initially. There are two ways that could work. So either there could be a separate bay in the recycling centre and the resident puts their mattress in the bay knowing that it's going to go off and be recycled, or potentially whilst it's a trial it could be sort of done in the background with mattresses extracted from the residual waste after it's been deposited by the residents and then sent off. But in either case, I suppose the benefit of a trial is just in terms of getting a better understanding of exactly how many mattresses we've got in the waste stream, how long it would take us to build up a load ready to send off for reprocessing. What that looks like in terms of sort of storage, I guess. And then obviously to sort of test the recycling reprocessor and just double check all their processes and things. I suppose that's it in relation to mattresses. The only other thing just to be aware of is, of course, again, relating to the POPs that we've just talked about. So we don't know how things are going to go in relation to the upholstered furniture, but potentially there is scope that those sorts of conditions we've just talked about for that could be extended to other materials, and mattresses is one of these. So there may come a time at some point when mattress recycling potentially isn't viable. But yes, that's also something I suppose to be aware of when making a decision about if and how we proceed with this. So I'll hand over to members to discuss.
Yes.
I'm interested to find out how many residents actually bring mattresses themselves, because a lot of the time when you buy a new one, the business that sells it to you will take the old one away, sometimes for a fee, but they will take it away, and they're obviously processed commercially.
That's certainly one perception, I guess. On the other end of the coin, I think about my annual neighborhood collection, where in the area where I live, where we cart out probably 20 or 25 mattresses every single free pickup that the neighborhood association has, because where there are areas with HMOs and all of that, there is a very frequent level of mattresses consistently coming out of these properties. So it's probably slightly different worlds, I think, but I think Councillor Page and I probably felt like we could come up with our own trial just off of the mattresses.
We could do you 50 from our ward.
Really. So it is, yeah, it's definitely something that I'm sure there are a lot of, but I do think the POP situation is going to definitely impact on the mattresses. I mean, yes, even more so.
Not so much a pun as a rollover.
Yeah.
Yes, isn't it? But they haven't said that. Thank you. Any other further questions on that? Who says? Yes, go for it. Yes. Sarah?
Sorry. Okay, so we're ready for the next item. Yeah.
Yes, I do. Yes, sorry, Sarah. Yes, please
sorry.
go ahead.
Yeah, so next item then is about Sue Ryder. So as I'm sure you're aware, we've been working with Sue Ryder at the recycling centres for a number of years. They currently take a small amount of bric-a-brac and furniture from both sites. That goes off to local shops to be resold. So yeah, working with Sue Ryder has a number of benefits. So hopefully we're diverting some items from the waste stream. Obviously, if the items get sold locally, hopefully those items then go on to benefit some of our local residents, and they can enjoy their use. Obviously, Sue Ryder are selling the items, so that generates an income from them, which they can hopefully use to support someone who needs support. And we also send Sue Ryder some bikes, and these currently go off to a prison for repair before they get resold in the shops. So that potentially gives these people some skills that potentially they can use upon their release. So we have identified a way in which we might be able to expand our work with Sue Ryder, and this relates to solid wooden items such as tables and cupboards and things. So these two would go to the prison, where these items would be sort of cleaned up and chopped up into smaller items to be made into things such as chopping boards, and then these would go back to the shops for resale. So I'm currently working with Sue Ryder to sort of finalise some of the details for a service level agreement. So exactly what items they need, how many, how often they're going to collect, etc. But it is hoped that that service could start within the next couple of weeks. I'm not expecting the amount of waste they take from us to be particularly large, but it might just be a nice little project to be involved in. And Sue Ryder have indicated that they would be happy to work with RE3 and put together a joint press release if that was something we wanted to do, just to publicise our work with Sue Ryder a bit more. Any questions on that one?
Not so much a question, just I'll throw this out to you. I have been approached by many residents over the period of time with regards to bikes and different things, and councillors. And I've asked officers to look into this with regards to a shop thing. Would you like to take this forward for me, Damien, so the rest of the members can see what we're considering as well, besides the Sue Ryder?
Yeah, I think just, Chair, thank you. Following on from the success of the reuse pop-up shop that was set up at Smallmead for a weekend, I think it was last year, we're going to be repeating that exercise at Longshot Lane at the end of October. So, items which will hopefully be reused by residents will be available for sale in that pop-up shop in a month's time. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Yes, Councillor.
Thank you. I keep popping in on everything, but we are in Reading utilising a free bulky waste pickup in order to try to impact our fly tipping. One of the questions about what people are able to actually put away as bulky waste, the word doors, which in section 5.2 we're talking about tables, cupboards, and all of that. For wooden items has always been kind of a question because doors kind of go into that funny DIY area. But it certainly seems that a good door might make an excellent chopping board and kindling and all of that other stuff. So I might kind of ask that the ideas about that removal of doors could be taken away and reconsidered, because I think that would fit in excellently here. And I do see doors just hanging out across Reading and in all kinds of locations as people do simple DIY, and that's a pretty easy win for some wood.
Thank you for that. Any others? And you've taken that on board, haven't you, officers? No doubt. Yep. Thank you.
Chairman, I'm just conscious of time, so Sarah, if you don't mind, I'm going to dive in and just deal with the contractor appraisal and the last couple of items very quickly. The contractor appraisal is something that we do, which is on top of the performance mechanism, as you'd appreciate in a long contract like this, as a specific performance mechanism. We find that it works well in many respects. It's still relevant, but of course it was written way back when the contract was being negotiated. And council priorities and even on a day-to-day basis priorities seem to be changing, don't they, over recent years. So the contractor appraisal is a way of working with the contractor to make sure that prevailing imperatives and needs are being met. Members can see the scores written there. The contractor works with us on this. We measure them for a year and we come down with a score. And we find that the areas that it covers, principally around areas of more general collaboration, working with us, being strategic, dealing with issues, bringing their best initiatives and new services to the RE3 table, as it were, are all reflected in there. We mark them quite hard. You may notice that 6 to 7 is an adequate level of performance. 8 to 9 is added value. We think they've done quite well this year. There are challenges, but I just want to bring that to members' note. And then the final item really is around communications. Lauren Shute, who had been working while our permanent member of communication staff, Monica, was on maternity leave, has now left. Monica's back. There's some really good communications, as you are aware, hopefully, around the Regrow charity or sort of giveaway. That's really good. And even yesterday, another little link to the booking system. Yesterday, a new newsletter was sent out detailing some of the recipients of the free compost. So that was really good. Look out for that. And members will be. It's a bit of a pat on the back for members, really, if I may. We talked at the last meeting around including schools into that free giveaway, and I just wanted to let you know, Monica told me earlier this week 27 schools have come forward. We can provide more detail about who they are, but that was the right choice to make, and that's really good. And that I think, unless there are any questions, just brings together that progress report. Thank you, Chairman.
Yes, it's excellent with the school part. It'd be nice to see how it's spread across. Any other questions on the paper, apart from the recommendation, as we now know, will have changed slightly, but I'm sure the officers will put in all the relevant requests we've made, and if we have the meeting in December, we can take all of these issues, hopefully, with our assistance. We will come and help forward for that.
Brilliant.
Everyone in agreement on that, ladies and gentlemen? Yep. Thank you very much.
Chairman, the next item is about the Environment Act, and again, just conscious of time, not I know this is important, but conscious of time, I will zip through this. It was the Environment Bill for a long time, and then late last year it became the Environment Act. We don't really know any more detail about it, unfortunately, except that which is coming forward in the form of works in progress presentations, such as the one that I've appended to this report. Just very quickly sort of run through some of the principles that you'll see in the slides. The main one is new funding arrangement, I suppose. At the moment, waste collection particularly is funded through the general taxation and no doubt supported through income that we can get from some of the services, as many councils do. That's likely to change. In fact, according to the Environment Act, it will change. Funding will be provided through contributions made by companies placing material that's in scope for this legislation on the market. So if you are the producer of a plastic bottle, you will be paying a levy which will constitute in aggregate the funding pot from which waste collection will in future be funded. The concept of all of that is really that councils will be assessed on their compliance with a number of elements of the legislation. There are 3 service archetypes, 3 ways that waste collection can be delivered. Those have been drawn up by RAP, the Environment sort of Consultancy. And funding will be apportioned to councils on the basis of their relative efficiency and effectiveness, which is a really important point for us to note. So, are we collecting it in the right way? Then are we efficient and effective? How does efficient and effective, how is it assessed? Well, as you can see on one of the slides, there will be a best in class. Councils will be put into sort of bundles or clusters, and there will be a best in class, which will be assessed by the cost, the relative performance, how much recycling are they collecting. If you're not best in class, then you're at risk, I think, of being assessed to be not optimally efficient or effective. And as we can see in one of the later slides, if we're not in that category, we will likely be presented with an improvement notice. Now, I don't think the improvement notice is going to be do this within a year or you're not going to get any funding, but there is a clear link made between the improvement notice and funding. It's really important, I think, that we spend quite some time trying to get our heads around all of this. And I think I would finish, rather than me banging on, I think it's probably more important for officers to get together and probably work over the course of the time between now and the next meeting. And perhaps bring back a presentation, a broader presentation, not just from me, but from the collection officers as well, perhaps, around how we feel those implications will play out for councils. Final point, Chairman, I would just make is that there are meant to be some workshops being laid on by DEFRA over the course of the autumn. When I had that presentation, that was going to be September or October. Well, I don't think it's September now, but it may be October, November, perhaps. What we should do is make sure that we've got some attendance at those meetings. And that's it. Thank you.
Seems our diaries are going to be quite full between now and Christmas. Having said that, any questions on this? Apart from, as I say, the efficiency of all councils depends on how one is collecting. And at point in time, our 3 weekly on the waste thing has done a success with Bracknell. I'd hate to see that changed, but therefore, let's see what that comes back to us. So can I take it the recommendation on 2-1 plus what Oliver's placed before us, we can accept? Yes. Page 57. Agenda item 10 is to receive the RE3 financial report. The item includes the likely disclosure exempt information, so we will be moving into the private section to discuss this item. May I therefore move that, pursuant to regulation for the local authorities, which I'm sure you are all aware of, and information relating to financial or business affairs or any particular persons. Do I have a second to make this movement?
Yep.
Yes. Yep. Yes, thank you. So we'll go ahead with the information.
Thank you.
Yes.
Sorry, so if you just confirm the back.
Yes, if you could take this. Thank you, sir.